The announcement I shall now read is being issued simultaneously in Peking and in the United States.
A sensational announcement 2 years in the making. President Nixon shocked the world with news of his visit to the People's Republic of China, foreshadowed by secret advance trips by National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger and young National Security Council staffer Winston Lord.
The two countries had been apart for 22 years. We'd been enemies, total mutual isolation, antagonism. We'd fought each other in Korea. We had different allies in Vietnam. So this was a courageous move by both sides to reach out to each other.
We interrupt the regular program schedule to bring you the following special report.
The announcement captured the imagination of the American media, and Nixon, facing a re-election year, wanted and got a TV spectacular.
It's a stunning announcement. It's one that's totally unexpected.
Open at first to only a handful of White House press corps reporters. Ultimately, almost 100 journalists accompanied the president on the week-long trip.
Mr. Nixon arrived here in Peking.
Air Force One touched down to little ceremony.
We were somewhat disappointed and surprised at how sparse and bleak the welcoming ceremony was. You had Chinese officials, you had some media, you had an honor guard and a band, and that was it. And as we rode in to the guest house along the streets of Beijing, there was nobody in the streets except people who were there naturally. So as a summit, we sort of naively thought, there'd be cheering crowds and all that. This was clearly not the case.
Nixon said of his mission, "We were embarking on a voyage of philosophical discovery, as uncertain and in some ways as perilous as the voyages of geographical discovery of an earlier time."
This is Howard Tuckner in quiet Tiananmen Square.
A voyage chronicled live on American television. At this late stage, the presidential party still had no idea if President Mao would even receive them.
Very quickly, Zhou Enlai came back to the guest house an hour after we arrived and said to Dr. Kissinger that Chairman Mao wanted to see the president right away. When we met with Mao, we were surprised at his style. He seemed very sort of casual. He had a sort of ironic tone to him. He spoke in brushstrokes rather than long paragraphs. But the more we thought about it over the coming days, and as we had much longer talks with Zhou Enlai, we realized the chairman, in his own clever way, had sort of set out the main outlines of their positions.
Lord, who later in his career served as the U.S. ambassador to China, was the only other American official alongside Nixon and Kissinger in the meeting, a cause of potential embarrassment for the much higher-ranking Secretary of State, William Rogers, who was cut out of the key meetings. Lord was cut out of the official photos and temporarily erased from history.
The Chinese later on gave me a picture with me in it in the original Nixon-Mao meeting, where you can see not where it had stopped for all the world to see up to then, but scanning over further to the right, and I'm sitting next to Kissinger.
Career diplomat Chas Freeman served as Nixon's interpreter.
Chinese at that time particularly was a language which forced you to take sides. There was a moment when our side spoke of parallel policies and interests. And there are two ways you can render that. Parallel lines are either lines that proceed at an equal distance from each other indefinitely and never meet, or they are lines which in the distance appear to converge. So I chose the latter.
All further negotiations were conducted by Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, a man Lord and Freeman remain impressed by.
President Nixon, in a way, very quickly succumbed to the incredible charm of Zhou Enlai, who was a man of great grace and tact and a way of presenting things that was quite uniquely persuasive.
He was incredibly impressive in his conversations, both strategically and conceptually, where he could talk at broad levels, which is where our relationship was at that point. We didn't have a lot of concrete business. Also historically and philosophically very well versed, but he also was totally on top of the issues and the details and the tactics, and all of this without notes.
President Nixon visited the Ming tombs today.
The week-long trip was meticulously choreographed by both nations.
This is a great wall that it had to be built by a great people.
Throughout, gestures of mutual respect, Pat Nixon's symbolic red coat, the Chinese host's grand scene setting.
Those were beautiful winter days, the Great Wall, which I had never before visited, the Ming tombs. The most disturbing part of all that, of course, was that the Chinese had arranged a family playing cards at one of the Ming tombs, which was entirely fake, and Zhou Enlai had to apologize for the zeal of his staff in creating this sort of Potemkin effect.
The big banquet, the first night, which had such a dramatic impact in this country around the world, where you had thousands of people in the Great Hall of the People, and Zhou Enlai and Nixon toasting each other, and the army band playing America the Beautiful and Turkey in the Straw, and other popular songs, was really very moving.
But while the principals attended a ballet, the centerpiece of the trip, the Shanghai Communique, hung in the balance. The sticking point, language concerning Taiwan. A compromise was reached with an oblique reference, a one-China policy remaining in US eyes, and no reference to whom should govern the territory. Parallel policies began to take shape, including an understanding on how to end the Vietnam War. The Shanghai Communique paved the way for full normalization of US-China relations 7 years later.
We shall now proceed with the signature of that agreement.
Nixon's other strategic hope, to use the breakthrough with China to pressure the then Soviet Union to come in from the cold, was also realized, resulting in another historic trip to Moscow a few months later, signing the SALT Arms Reduction Pact with Brezhnev.
The president's trip has opened up a new chapter in relations between Washington and Peking.
Nixon's trip to China was billed as the week that changed the world.
I think it's fair to say since World War II that Nixon's trip and the events around it and before it were among the 3 or 4 most important geopolitical events in all those decades.
Nobody imagined that the American and the Chinese people would develop the complex, really rather warm and cooperative relationship we have. Our governments still bicker and have differences, but at the level of popular relations, this is quite a close relationship.